Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dive into this incredible 300-year period where the social ladder, well, it wasn't just shaken up, it was completely smashed to pieces. And then it was rebuilt with brand new rungs, things like race, state power, and believe it or not, even hairstyles. So, you just saw that really dramatic order from Spain's rulers. And look, that wasn't just some local issue. You can think of it as a tremor, a sign of this massive global earthquake that was happening, a time when the basic rules of who had power and who even belonged were being totally rewritten.
Yeah, between 1450 and 1750, this was happening everywhere. And we're not just talking about the rich getting richer. No, this was a complete reinvention of the whole game. Suddenly, there were new winners and new losers, and the rules were being decided by these new, powerful ideas about race, about religion, and about the power of the state. So, let's get right into it.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the new elites, the people climbing this brand new ladder. Then, we'll talk about the old elites, the ones desperately trying to hang on. After that, we'll see how governments started redrawing the lines of who was in and who was out. And finally, we'll connect all the dots and see what powerful forces were driving all this change.
All right, first up, the rise of new elites. As these European empires started expanding like crazy, they ran into a huge problem. How do you control all this new land and all these different people? Well, their solution was pretty radical. They just invented entirely new social structures, basically from scratch. And probably the most dramatic, most clear-cut example of this is the Spanish casta system in the Americas. I mean, think about it. Before the Spanish showed up, you had this incredibly diverse continent with countless different cultures. The casta system was designed to just wipe all that complexity away. It imposed this super rigid, race-based order, and its legacy, this idea of linking your race to your social status, would stick around for centuries. So how did it work? Well, right at the tippy top, you had the Peninsulares. These were people born in Spain. Just below them were the Creoles, still of European descent but born in the Americas. Then you had the Castas, and this got incredibly specific with dozens of different classifications for people of mixed-race heritage. And then at the very bottom of this new ladder were the indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans. It was just this massive, massive social experiment, a whole hierarchy built almost entirely on where you were born and what your race was. Okay, so while these brand new elites are climbing the ladder in the Americas, what's happening back in Europe and Asia? Well, the old guard, the established aristocrats, they're fighting tooth and nail just to keep from falling off the ladder completely.
Take Russia, for example. You had the boyars, who were the traditional, powerful, landowning nobles, and they just watched as czars like Peter the Great systematically took their power away, all because he wanted to centralize control. And it was a really similar story over in France. You have kings like Louis XIV, who basically looked at the powerful nobles in the countryside and saw them as a direct threat to his own absolute power. He wanted all the power concentrated right in his own hands.
And you might be asking, why were the monarchs winning this fight? Well, a huge reason came down to technology. For centuries, a noble's power was his castle, right? It was this nearly impenetrable fortress. But then, gunpowder and powerful cannons show up on the scene. And suddenly those thick stone walls could just be blasted into rubble. Technology was a total game changer, and it tipped the scales of power big time, right into the hands of the central rulers.
So all these huge power shifts, they had really profound consequences, especially for minority groups. As these states got more and more powerful and centralized, they started drawing much sharper lines to define who was really part of the group and who was an outsider.
And you can see two totally different ways this played out. Over in Spain, after the long Reconquista to take back the peninsula from Muslim rulers, the monarchy was all about religious purity, so they expelled their entire Jewish population. Just gone. But contrast that with the Ottoman Empire. They saw an opportunity. They actually welcomed Jewish people fleeing from Spain. Now, it wasn't perfect equality, for sure. They had to pay a special tax, but it was a safe place, a haven where many of these communities could actually thrive.
But these lines of us versus them weren't just drawn around religion. In Qing Dynasty China, identity could be enforced through something as simple, as visible, and as personal as a haircut, the queue.
So, here's the story. When the Manchu people from the north conquered China, they had a huge problem. How do we, a tiny minority, control this massive Han Chinese population? Their solution was symbolic, but it was absolutely brutal. They forced all Han men to adopt the Manchu hairstyle, the queue. It became this daily, visible test of whether you were loyal or not. And refusing to do it, that was seen as an act of pure rebellion, and the punishment was often death.
So let's pause for a second. What on earth connects a Spanish royal decree, a Russian aristocrat losing his power, and a mandatory hairstyle in China? I mean, they seem totally unrelated, right? Happening thousands of miles apart. But they're actually all part of the same global story, all woven together by the exact same powerful forces.
So what were those forces? What was powering this massive global shift? Well, it definitely wasn't a coincidence. It was more like a perfect storm of three huge interconnected forces that were reshaping societies absolutely everywhere.
Okay, number one, the consolidation of state power. You had rulers like the czars in Russia crushing the old nobles, and French kings pushing their aristocrats to the side. Number two, global interconnection. As these huge maritime empires grew, they needed new ways to control people, which led to new racial hierarchies like the caste system. And number three, new technologies. Gunpowder specifically gave these central governments the military power, the muscle, to finally defeat the old aristocracy and knock down their castles.
In all this history, it kind of leaves us with a really big question for today, doesn't it? What are the modern equivalents of gunpowder or those first giant empires? What are the powerful forces, things like AI, globalization, maybe new ideologies that are breaking apart and rebuilding our own social ladders right now, maybe without us even noticing?